He's teaching. I think he's teaching. We can wish him happy birthday. He had his birthday this week. Yeah. Anyway. Hi, good morning. Okay, good morning. Hi, Rose, good morning. Here, pass these around for your friends here. Pass these about. Pass them down. Good morning. Good morning, good morning. Take one, pass these around, please. Good morning, Oscar. Nice to see you. Good morning, pass those about. Good morning. How are you? Yeah. Thank you. And pass those around for me? Thank you. Welcome home. Thanks. Good morning. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Nice to have you here. Good. Well, I'll introduce you around. These are all nice people. Everybody say hello to Julie. This is a good corner in the room. This is Julie. She's new here, so everybody be nice to her, okay? Right? This is a judge. He's in your business. He's a doc. You don't want to talk to him. All right? There's all kinds of good people here.
Do you mind if I check the pack to make sure it's on?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Baby.
Beautiful.
Should be okay.
Thank you.
Good morning. Boker Tov. Shabbat Shalom. We're going to do Shimon Bar Yochai today because it's Lag Bomer in his honor. Pass him around. He's got enough. There's plenty of papers. Don't worry about it. Okay, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Oy. Okay, good morning. Shabbat Shalom. Come on in. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome back. Good to see everybody. Okay. Following our Torah study this morning, you're all invited. There's a number of services in the building. There'll be a meditation group in here if you want to sit deeply and quietly, and service in the sanctuary. Of course, lovely kid having her bat mitzvah, and there's a Shabbat Chatan with a beautiful young couple, and there's enchiladas for lunch. So, what traditional Jewish food? Mexican blintzes, you know. This morning we have some guests coming to talk to us, and everyone's invited to come hear them. There's a marvelous institution in Israel called the Yemin Ord Youth Village. Anyone ever been there? It's in the north, just south of Haifa. When Israel was founded, the leaders of the community discovered that they had hundreds, even thousands of young people who were coming from Europe and Arab countries who were orphaned, whose parents had been decimated in the Holocaust or in other kinds of activities. So rather than create orphanages, as sort of the old style model, they created youth villages. And the purpose of a youth village was to raise these kids into adulthood. And Yemin Ord was founded under that principle. A wonderful educator by the name of Chaim Perry came to run it and brought a marvelous philosophy of respect for children and respect for their growing. And this institution has been going ever since the 1940s. After they finished raising the generation of Holocaust orphans, they became a center for any kid in the state of Israel whose parents couldn't raise them. And they're, kids who, for various reasons, parents, instead of putting them in a foster system, they send them to a youth village. Immigrant kids, kids from around the world who needed help. So they had populations of Russian kids coming, whose parents had difficulty, populations of other immigrant kids, and more recently populations of Ethiopian Jewish kids who were coming without their parents or whose parents are not able to care for them. Plus various kinds of kids who come from rough homes, juvenile delinquency kind of situations where they need a different environment to raise the kid. So the Yemin Ord Youth Village has this remarkable history of raising these kids into good, healthy citizens. And the model was so effective that some years ago there was an American philanthropist who had this idea of bringing this elsewhere in the world, and she paid for the youth village people at Yemin Ord to go to Rwanda, where there was this horrible genocide, and they built a Yemin Ord in Rwanda under the same educational principles, with the staff coming to teach Rwandan educators and Rwandan counselors how to raise kids who are in Rwanda. So there's now a Yamin Ord in Israel and a Yamin Ord in Rwanda, of all places. Anyway, they're coming this morning. They're going to speak at the end of the service, tell us a little bit about the village, and then afterwards we'll have lunch, and around 12:30, 12:40, we'll meet back in here to hear that story. And I believe that the person who's coming is one of the leaders of the institution, and in addition, we have a young man who was raised by that institution, who's now a commander in the Israeli Navy, who's going to speak about his own experience. Good morning, Mick.
Good morning.
Lovely to see you. Good morning. Good to see you. Good morning, Marsh. So please come and join us. So at the end of services, stick around. Lunch at 12:30. It's pretty good. And then 12:30, we'll meet back in here to hear that story. Okay? That's this morning's celebration of Shabbat. We have this next week. So we'll have Shabbat next week, of course, and then on Monday of next week, which is Memorial Day, right? Did I get that right? So next Shabbos, which is Shabbos morning, we spend the Shabbat of Memorial Day. It's been our custom now for almost a decade, honoring veterans. All of those who have served America, Israel, Canada, any free country, to come and to receive honor. So Harvey, my dear friend Harvey Keenan, organizes this. We're going to have hundreds of veterans from the community, Jewish and non-Jewish, in shul. And following the service, which we'll go through relatively quickly, we're going to hear from speakers to talk about. This year we're going to have. There's a young man whose father was involved in the Bataan Death March in the Philippines, and has written a book and made a movie about that. He'll talk about his father's experience. We have a mom who's a Gold Star mom who lost a son in Afghanistan, and we'll talk about the support network for Gold Star moms. And we have a gentleman who won the French Legion of Honor during the Second World War, and we'll have 18 people who have won the French Legion of Honor coming to share their courage with us, and as well lots and lots of veterans. So if you are someone who served, come to shul next Shabbos, and we will honor you. We'll honor you, okay? We ask every veteran to stand up and tell us who they are and where they served. If you have friends, family, neighbors, come to shul. The program will start about 11 o'clock. You can come anytime before that. We'll have Torah study. We'll go into the other room. We'll dive in together, and then we'll celebrate those who have served. It's a wonderful thing to do because there's a lot of these guys never got honored. A lot, especially Vietnam vets, never got a parade. And it's a great thing to be able to say thank you for their service. So that's next Shabbos morning. And then the Monday after that is the dedication of the new building. All right, so it starts at 12. Come at 11:30 for some coffee. We're going to have a very short ceremony dedicating the new building. A lunch, barbecue lunch for everybody. And then we'll celebrate the whole afternoon. There's activities in the building. There's games for kids and stuff for grown-ups, and just enjoy it. It's a beautiful, beautiful building. So come in. That's the Monday of Memorial Day. Did I get that right? Yes. Good. And then we're going to go through the end of June together. We'll talk about that later. All right. If you don't open the Chumash, but if you were to open the Chumash, this morning's Torah portion is called Emor, and Emor has one of the three renditions of the Jewish calendar in it, all of the holidays of the Jewish year. There's one in Exodus, there's one in Deuteronomy, and there's one here in Emor, in Leviticus. This one has all the sacrifices attached to it. And among the various holidays that you will see, there is a very interesting period of time that is counted down between the holiday of Pesach and the holiday of Shavuot. It's called the Omer. The Torah says you will count down 7 weeks, 7 sevens, from Pesach to Shavuot. In fact, Shavuot isn't even given a date in the Torah. It's just the 50th day after Pesach. You're to count down 7 sevens. In the ancient world, what they did was, and the Torah describes this, is you would take a stalk of wheat for each day. When you got 7, you'd bind it up. When you had 7 sevens, that's Shavuot. That makes sense? This is called the counting of the Omer. Today's day 26, in case anyone's interested. And you do this every day in shul. There's a bracha, Asher Kishanim V'Svatav Al Sfiras HaOmer, and you count 7 sevens. Those of us who went to school went to elementary school in the 1960s, and they taught us something called the new math. Billy, remember the new math? Yes. If you also are a fan of Tom Lehrer, There's a great song that he wrote about the new math. The new math taught us that when we normally count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we count in something called base 10. So 1, 0 represents 10. I don't know where they got 10 from, but they did 10. But when we were in elementary school, they taught us how to count base 8, base 7. Like base 8 is how you'd count if you lost 2 fingers. It's 8. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. Get it? So the Omer is counting in base 7, basically. Okay, that's how you do it. And if you're a creative Jewish math teacher, you say it's the Omer, so it's 7, 7. So you talk about square roots and square numbers and cube roots and cube. That's a lot of fun. The Omer is counted from Pesach to Shavuot. It's the connection between the two, and the connection between the two is important. The Torah is given at the great philosopher about negative and freedom. Pesach is freedom from constraint, freedom from slavery, freedom from bondage, freedom from limitation. Shavuos is freedom too. It's what happens when you take your freedom and you invest it in a vision. I want to be able to do something with my freedom. Freedom isn't something just to grasp. Freedom is something to invest. You use your freedom to accomplish something. And that freedom, too, is an important part of freedom, because if you only get freedom from, you have anarchy. It's the kid on the second day of summer vacation. I mean, the kid counted down every day of the semester from February till summer vacation. And when summer vacation you remember this. When summer vacation finally came, the kid, in his joy and exhilaration, I'm free. And the first day they go swimming and the second day they mope around the house, I'm bored. And that's when if you're a good parent, you look to the kid and you say, God told me I had to feed you, clothe you, protect you, and educate you. Nowhere did God tell me I have to entertain you. Good, be bored. School starts in 3 months, That's freedom from. Freedom from is when you remove restraint, but you don't give a person the tools to know what to do with that freedom. So when we get to Mount Sinai and we're given Torah, that's freedom too. Now I have a vision. I know what my freedom is for. I know how to invest my freedom. If you want to have the freedom to play piano, you have to sit and practice. If you want the freedom of speaking French, you have to sit and practice. If you want the freedom of health, you have to exercise. Freedom, too, demands something of you. Freedom from is easy. I just take away stuff. But freedom, too, demands discipline. It demands because then you have a skill and you can do something with it. So the Omer connects these two kinds of freedom from and freedom to. It connects Pesach to Shavuot. Now, for some strange reason, the Omer, this period from Pesach to Shavuot, became a period of sadness and mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G. So, for example, it is a custom not to shave during the Sfira, during the counting of the Omer. And you'll see if you have Orthodox relatives, they become very, very hairy, right? You're not supposed to have celebrations during this time. I mean, there are all kinds. Now, no one's quite sure where that came from. It appears the most popular theory is that there was a plague among the students of Rabbi Akiba in the 1st century, and this became the time of mourning. We're mourning for the great students of Rabbi Akiba. That's one possibility. There are other possibilities as well. But if you have traditional relatives, there's no celebrations, there's no parties, there's no weddings. One day, there's 2 days. The one day is Yom Ha'atzmaut, but one day becomes important during the course of the Omer, which is the 33rd day. The 33rd day of the Omer is a day when the restrictions of the Omer are lifted. You're allowed to have celebrations, and there are all kinds of customs for the 33rd day. Now, in Hebrew, just to get this clear, the way you write numbers is with letters. Every letter of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, has a numerical value, right? So 33 is Lamed. Lamed is 30, and Gimel is 3. Lamed Gimel, Lag be'Omer, the 33rd day of the Omer. Everybody get that? That's where it comes from. That's just the number. It's just the date. It's just the 4th of July, Lag be'Omer, 33rd day of the Omer. Now, what happened on the 33rd day of the Omer that broke the spell, that breaks the mourning custom? Again, nobody's exactly sure. But it is associated, again, the most popular myth, the most popular theory, is that it's associated with the life and the death of a particular rabbi. His name is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he is a very interesting character. So this morning, we are going to spend the morning with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai to try to answer the question of why is it that on the yard site of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you're allowed to have parties when the rest of the Omer you're not. So who is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Yes.
So I just want to say, Ami brought a piece for him.
Yes.
And
He's a very important guy in the tradition.
I was married on Live Omer.
Well, you were married on Lag Ba'Omer.
Which happened to be Mother's Day when we were married.
Well, that's the real reason. It's Mother's Day.
No.
How beautiful. I'm kidding. I love you. You know that. Yes, please. Yeah.
In Torah, when it starts saying how to count it,
Ah.
it says from the Shabbat.
Yeah, so there's a big argument. There's a big argument in the Talmud. The Torah says you will start counting from Shabbat. So does that mean the Shabbat of Pesach, like the Sabbath that will naturally fall within Pesach? The rabbis of the Talmud determined that they would count it from the first day of Pesach. So on the eve of the first day of Pesach, the next day, that's when you start counting. That's how the rabbis decided to do it, even though it looks like it was supposed to be from Shabbat. And there are reasons for there are linguistic and other kinds of midrashic reasons. That's how we do it. So if you remember, I don't know if you got to this point, the first night of the Omer is the second Seder. It's that night. It's the night after the first day of Pesach. That's when you start counting the Omer. Okay? All right, so Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai was born somewhere around the generation after the destruction of the temple. You remember that the Romans governed Israel. The Romans governed Judea from 64 BCE, when Pompey comes and conquers Judea. They governed it horribly incompetently, and the Jews rise up against Roman hegemony in 67 CE. They rise up 150 or 30 years after the arrival of the Romans, and they carry out a rebellion against Rome in 67 CE. The Romans are freaked out, that's the technical term for it, and they want to make sure they don't lose Judea, because Judea is their last bastion against the east, and the Parthian Empire, the Persians were beginning to push on that part of the empire. So the Romans take their best legion, the 10th Legion, they take their most talented general, Vespasian, and they send him to Phoenicia, and he marches down the coast and turns left and go up to Jerusalem. And in order to make an example of what happens if you rebel against the Romans, they decimate Jerusalem and they flatten the Temple of Jerusalem. This is the most powerful trauma suffered by the Jewish people up until the Holocaust. Up until the Holocaust, it is still suffered. I mean, people still mourn for that moment, the decimation of the temple, because the temple was the center of Jewish life. And now the populace of Israel gathers around the rabbis who have fled from the battle and established a center in Yavne, a little town on the coast. And they ask the rabbis, what do we do now? And the rabbis begin developing what we call Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is the great hero of that. Rabbi Yochanan gathers his students, and with the help of his students, they begin forming a Judaism that can be celebrated any place. A Judaism that doesn't need a temple, doesn't need a city, doesn't need political sovereignty. I'll come in and have a seat, please. Please make yourself comfortable. There's lots of seats, lots of places to sit. Anywhere you like, just come and have a seat, or bring the chair inside. Right here, there's a chair right here, a chair of honor. Come on. No, come on. Thank you. Thanks. So the rabbis start putting together this new kind of Judaism, which is our Judaism, and from 70 until about 120, that's Jewish life. That's the beginning of the Mishnaic period, and that's where you get Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and his students are Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, and then their student is Rabbi Akiba. In the time of Rabbi Akiba, somewhere around 120, Jews, who never learned, decide to rebel against Rome again under a fellow named Bar Kokhba, who was said to be the Messiah by Rabbi Akiba. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. And not only did it not work out, but this time the Romans really got mad. And they come in and they, again, decimate the land. They make the study and teaching of Torah illegal. And they begin basically not genocide, but a tremendous repression of Jewish life in the land. This is, by the way, just so you get a sense of this, the name of our land was Judea up until then. And then the Romans, as a way of trying to erase us from history, changed the name of the land to Palestine for the Philistines who used to live there. Now, there were no Philistines living there for 800 years. But the idea was to say, we're going to not only going to erase this people, we're going to erase any memory of this people from this land. Jews were not permitted to go live in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is renamed Aeola Capitolina, and a Roman temple is built on the ruins of the Jewish temple. This is the beginning of the real repression of the Jewish people. Rabbi Akiba gets arrested for teaching Torah, and like all political prisoners, they need to make an example of him, so he's tortured to death in public so that the Jews will understand the power of Rome. Rabbi Akiba's great student is Shimon Bar Yochai. So if you're counting, it's the fourth generation. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiba, and then the fourth generation is a group of rabbis that Rabbi Akiba trains, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. These are the guys who are now consolidating the rabbinic tradition, but they're living under this terrible Roman oppression. It's a strange thing that the more the oppression destroyed Jewish life, the more creative these guys got. And these are the people who put together what we call Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the guy we're going to learn about today, is the third most quoted rabbi in the Mishnah. So there are really three versions of Rabbi Shimon. Talking about his career, his adulthood, takes place after 120, between 120 and 160. Okay, that's more or less his career, CE, after zero. Okay? There are three different sort of personae of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai we meet in the halacha, in the law. The Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai we meet in the Agadah, in the legendary tradition. And then what happens to him next, which is the reason why we have Lag BaOmer. And that's what we're all going to get through in the next half an hour. Bill.
Was that the generation that matched the Haftarot to the Torah?
Yeah, this generation that puts together most of the customs that you associate with Judaism. These are the guys who invented the synagogue. I mean, these are the guys who put our prayer book together. These are the guys who are matching Torah portions and Haftarah portions. These are the guys who invent Purim and Pesach and Shabbos. All of the things you know as Judaism come from the Bible, but all of the details, these are the guys who invented it. If not these guys, their predecessors and their successors. It's the 5 generations of the Mishnaic rabbis. Right? You won't find Shabbos candles anywhere in the Bible. Right? Abraham and Sarah. Sarah did not light Shabbos candles. Now, you ask your Orthodox relatives, did Emmanuel light Shabbos candles? They'll look at you like you're crazy. Of course she lit Shabbos candles. Ask them, how about Hanukkah candles? Of course she lit Hanukkah candles. Did she have a pushka on her windowsill? Of course she had a pushka. Did she belong to pioneer women? Of course she belonged to pioneer women. There's a certain anachronism to traditional Judaism, right? So they have Jacob learning in a yeshiva, right? And they have Sarah Imenu, lighting Shabbos. But it's not in the Bible. That was the rabbi's invention. That comes much later in all of the halachot, all the laws and traditions that surround these later in the tradition. These are the guys who create this. So 3 different personae. The Shimon Bar Yochai, the great halachic scholar, who understands, see, for him, the Torah is divine. And if the Torah is divine, that means every truth you'll ever need in your life is in it. You just have to learn how to read it. And they develop a hermeneutic. They develop an interpretive tradition of how to read the Bible because they're pulling out of the Bible all sorts of laws and traditions and ethics that are only implicit. Just for a moment, understand this idea that a traditional religion always looks backward. And its idea is that things aren't invented, they're discovered. Right? Shabbos candles weren't invented by the rabbis. They were discovered by the rabbis, hiding in the text of the Torah. Now, that's not such a crazy idea, because if I'd ask you a different kind of question, those of you who have a scientific bent, when a physicist discovers something, did he discover it or invent it? Was relativity discovered or invented? No, that's not so easy, because it's the application of human mind, the creation of theoretical constructs that then explain material facts, right? It's not so clear that science is discovered or invented. Is culture discovered or invented? Did Beethoven create the Ninth Symphony, or just hear it in the stars? Mozart claimed he heard the music and wrote it down. Remember the movie Salieri, which noted one interesting thing. When Mozart wrote music, there were no corrections in the manuscripts. Like, he wrote one draft. No crossouts. There was no delete button on Wolfgang's computer. When he wrote, and he claimed he heard it and he wrote it down. That's all he did. He was getting dictation from God, right? Right. Yeah. So the question is music created or discovered or invented? Is science discovered? Is Torah discovered or invented? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would tell you, it's all there, I just found it. That's what he would say. So let's take a look at a little bit of halacha, okay? Law, okay? This is apropos because this is the reason why is because the verse they're quoting was from last week's Torah portion. And you'll remember we read it. So there's a Mishnah in Bava Metzia. Bava Metzia is torts. Torts. Torts means Jews suing Jews. Because that's the longest book in the Talmud, I wonder why, they divided it into three. You know, there's a Japanese kosher restaurant called Sosumi, you know? Jews suing Jews. Jews suing Jews. Damages, torts, this kind of stuff. So what they do is they divide it into three. The Bava means gate. So there's a Bava Kama, the first gate, the second gate, and the third gate. So in the middle one, we have all kinds of laws of fraud, business fraud, okay? So in the middle of that, you have the Mishnah, and he says the following: just as there's wrong in buying and selling, there's wrong done with words. Ona'at devarim. You can cause damage with words. So now there's a long discussion in the Gemara, in the Talmud, about all the different categories of causing damage with words. And I just excerpted this little piece for you. The rabbis taught that this is based on the verse from last week's Torah portion, you will therefore not wrong one another. Now, what's the rabbi's logic? They said, look, the Torah tells you all over the place you can't hurt people. So why did it have to come and tell me you shall not wrong one another? And the answer is a kind of wrong that you might think is actually wrong, and the answer is words. So what is the Gemara telling you? That when your mama told you sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me, she was wrong. Words can hurt. Words can destroy a society. Words can destroy social solidarity. Words can destroy a human being. When the Torah says you will not wrong one another, this is referring to words that cause damage. And there's a whole list that I took out of here. That's where the little dots are. The whole list of different ways that words can hurt. But I wanted Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan, who is 2 generations after Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, taught on the authority of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So Rabbi Yochanan preserved the tradition of his teacher's teacher, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Wrong done with words are more damaging than wrong done with money. Think about that for a minute. If I take your money deceitfully, that's less damaging than if I use words to hurt you. How come? He's going to base it on a verse, but you know the real answer, right? You know the pillowcase story, okay? Wrong done with words are more damaging than wrongs done with money, because of the first it's written, you shall fear thy God, but not of the second, right? So he bases it on a verse. What's the real reason? Yeah, Words linger. The story, there's a wonderful little story in the folklore about a guy who goes around spreading awful, terrible stories about somebody. And when he finally realizes what he's done, and he regrets what he's done, so he goes to the Rebbe and he says, I want to apologize. I want to take back what I did. I want to fix the damage. So the rabbi says, sure, I'll show you how you do it. You have to do a little bit of a ritual for me. He says, great, bring me a feather pillow. So he brings him a feather pillow, and the rabbi takes a scissor and he cuts it open, and he goes, poof, and guess where the feathers go? And he says, good, go collect all the feathers for me. Because once I utter a word, that word spreads independent of me. Once you spread a false rumor, once you spread a false report, once you spread it, you can't ever get it back. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai understands the power of words, and he understands the destructive power of words. And remember, he's a refugee living in his own land. He's living in a place where social solidarity is the difference between life and death. A community under deep pressure. And if you allow words to corrupt the connections among us, then we will lose that solidarity that protects us. And then he goes on and he says, Rabbi Yochanan further taught on the authority of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, better a man throws himself into a fiery furnace than publicly puts his neighbor to shame. Right? The Hebrew is, by the way, the Hebrew is the conclusion of the Gemara follows Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yochanan, which is Malbin Panav Chavero, the guy who embarrasses his friend. And the literal meaning of the phrase is you drain the blood from your friend's face, from your fellow's face. It's like you murdered him. That to destroy someone's reputation, destroy someone's place in the community, to spread an evil rumor is a form of murder. It's a form of murder. Now you see two things about this. So you see what he's doing is drawing lessons from the Talmud, lessons from the Bible, because it's his conviction that all truth, all moral truth is there. And the other thing you're going to see is that he's an extremist. Shimon Bar Yochai is an extremist. And that's going to be his reputation. This is a zealot. This is a zealot, right? And some of you are lawyers, and you tell me what happens when a legislator or a judge, someone who has the power to make judgment, to make law, is a zealot. Right? Well, if you're watching the news these days, you're probably watching that, so I don't want to go there. But this guy, you're going to see how his zealotry works in just a second. But first, we're going to recite the blessing and start the air conditioning. Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav vetzivanu al mezug avir umain. It's the air conditioning. It's going to get cold, then I'll make it warmer again. Umain. Okay, now, the first Shimon Bar Yochai is a Rabbi Shimon that you read all over the Mishnah. And all over the Mishnah, it sounds like this. He will take the halacha and give you the halacha, but give it to you in the most extreme metaphor, because that's who he is. The second Shimon Bar Yochai is the Shimon Bar Yochai of legend. That is, in the Talmudic literature, not only did they collect the legal decisions of these guys, but they collected legends about them. It was the life of the rabbi that was equally important as a moral example. There are many legends of Shimon Bar Yochai. I gave you two of them. One is the most famous. This one's the most charming. This one's the most charming. In fact, in some ways, this really shouldn't be the legend we tell, because it's much too charming for Shimon Bar Yochai, because he's a zealot. But this is a charming legend, and I thought you all deserve a little sweetness and light as we begin this day. A couple was married for many years and had no children. According to the halacha, if a man is married to his wife for 10 years and they don't conceive a child, he has to divorce her. That's halacha. He has to. That's halacha. Not everybody observes that halacha. Not everybody keeps kosher. I don't know if you knew this. According to the law, the husband was obligated to divorce her. It should be her. Divorce his wife is what it should say. But he didn't want to do this. So he goes to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he says to the Rebbe, what do I do? And the Rebbe has tremendous insight. Every legend talks about his insight. So Shimon Bar Yochai told him, just as they had celebrated their joy, the joy of their mutual bond when they got married, so should the severance of their bond be celebrated in joy. Right? You had a feast when you got married. You should have a feast when you get divorced. So that's not a bad idea, by the way. But the guy's reluctant. He loves his wife. But the halacha says he has to divorce her. And he wants to observe the halacha. But Rabbi Shimon sees something. He sees something nobody else can see. So he says to the guy, just as you had a feast when you married her, I want you to have a feast when you divorce her. So the husband prepared a great feast. He called his wife and asked her in his joy. So the idea is he calls to her and says to choose whatever she desires of his possessions to be hers. He would refuse nothing. He would not refuse her. He would not refuse her anything. So he says to her, I love you. Anything of mine you can have. All of it you can have. Because this is a reluctant separation, right? What did she do? This is Jewish women. She served him wine and got him drunk and fell asleep, and he fell asleep on his bed. She told the servants to take him on his bed to her father's house. Presumably after they divorced, she would move back in with her parents, right? The following morning, when he awoke and found himself in his wife's home, in the father's home, he asked her why he was brought here, why she brought him here. And she replied, you told me that I could take whatever I wanted. I desire not gold, not silver, not precious gems, nor pearls. All I want is you. See, I told you that's sweet. You are the sole object of my desire. When the husband heard this, he became once again enamored of his wife and took her back as before. And on this merit, the Holy One, blessed be He, granted them children. Okay? I mean, it's a legend. Come on, So he becomes a character and legend because of his insight. He becomes a character and legend because of his zealotry, his extremism. And you got to, again, we're going to do one more legend, which is really the most important one. Okay, now it'll be warm again. Okay? His character is shaped when he witnesses the brutal, brutal torture murder of his teacher. In a strange way, someone one of these days should write a book that Western civilization is shaped by three martyrdoms. The martyrdom of Socrates creates Western political thought. The martyrdom of Jesus creates Christianity. And the martyrdom of Rabbi Akiba creates Judaism. Watching the destruction of his teacher makes him into this zealot and makes him the zealot who's going to protect Torah at all costs. And Torah becomes, the Jewish wisdom becomes the only thing he lives and dies for. So here's the most famous legend of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which is a marvelous, marvelous legend. So the scene is after the destruction, or after the death of Rabbi Akiba. We're in Yavne, the Academy of Yavne. And the rabbis, who are all the students of Rabbi Akiba, are gathered together trying to figure out what should be the nature of Judaism in this new world, in the brutality of the Roman world. And the question they're asking is, how do we live in this world? How do you live in a post-Holocaust world? How much of the post-Holocaust world are you permitted to imbibe? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, that's our hero, were learning together with their student Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda began the discussion by observing, how noble are the works of this Roman nation. They laid out streets, they built bridges, they erected baths. Rabbi Yossi was silent. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai spoke up, and he said, all that they made to serve themselves. They laid out streets to settle prostitutes, baths to pamper themselves, bridges to levy tolls. All right, look up for a second. What's the question here? This is a profoundly important question. We are a small minority. We are a last glimmer, the last spark of a great culture and civilization living in the darkness of this Roman world. This Roman world is barbaric and brutal. It is cruel. It is horrifying. What should be our relationship to that world? Can we live in that world? Is there anything in that culture, the culture outside of us, that we can imbibe? Can we assimilate elements of the external culture selectively? Or if you take anything, you end up with everything. Can we assimilate anything of their wisdom and their skill selectively without also imbibing the poison of their cruelty and their brutality? If you have ever been to B'nai Brak or Meir Sharim or Williamsburg, Brooklyn, you see that this debate isn't over. Why do those people isolate themselves in those communities, dress in ways that have nothing to do with our world and want nothing to do with our world? Because for them, Western civilization is Hitler. And there's no way to separate anything that's good in Western civilization from Auschwitz. There is a public health emergency in those neighborhoods in New York today because vaccines belong to science. Science belongs to Western civilization, and Western civilization tried to murder us all. Therefore, to hell if you're putting that needle in my kid's arm. That needle is Hitler. That needle is the poison of your civilization. Now you come back and say, what, are you crazy? Your kid's going to get sick. You have 15 children living in one apartment. One kid gets sick. They're all going to get sick. It's a public health emergency. And these great rabbis are standing up saying, you got to vaccinate your kids. But you see, when you teach people that everything in the outward environment is evil, they don't want any of it. They don't have televisions. Not supposed to have computers. They don't have telephones. Well, they have telephones, but only to talk to each other. But they don't want connection with our world. Our world is poison. Poison. That's the idea, right? So the question is, can you assimilate selectively? How much can you assimilate? What do you assimilate selectively? Look, I told you this story once. When we were living in Jerusalem some years ago, we were in summertime, and I had Yona was on a trip, on the USY trip, but the two little ones were living with Nina and me. And I decided one Friday afternoon we'd go up to Meir Sharim in order to get him ready for Shabbos. So it's Friday afternoon in Jerusalem, and we all dress frum. You know, black slacks, white shirt. My wife and my daughter put on long skirts. And we take the bus up into Geula, and we're standing on the corner of Meir Sharim and Rehov HaNevi'im, and really right in the deepest, darkest, most religious neighborhood in Jerusalem. And there's a man standing there waiting for the traffic light like us, and he's dressed in full Hasidic, right? Wool suit, overcoat, hat, boots, right? And it's 100 degrees and 100% humidity. It's a Jerusalem summer afternoon. And Rafi, my dear son, at the time was 8, and he turned to me and said, Abba, isn't he hot? So I said, ask him. He said, how shall I ask him? I said, you know Hebrew, ask him. So the kid goes to Hebrew day school, so he goes over, and like a sweet little 8-year-old kid pulls on the guy's coat. He says, Slicha Adoni, halo cham lecha? You're not hot? And the guy looks at the kid, and first he's like angry Hasidic guy. Then he says, oh, it's a kid, you know. A big smile comes across his face, and he laughs and says, Lo chamli, mod noch hayom. I'm not hot at all. It's a beautiful day. It's a very comfortable day. What do you learn? This man not only rejects my way of life, my values, my politics, my philosophy, my culture, this man refuses to accept my meteorology. I live in 21st century Western Jerusalem. He lives in 14th century Poland in the winter. Mamish, he lives in 14th century Poland in the winter. Doesn't want anything to do with my world. He has literally checked out of my world. The coat, the garb says, back off, I don't live in your world. You understand that? Chabad, God bless them, Chabad is the exception. They were sent by their Rebbe to talk to us as emissaries. But short of that, they would isolate themselves as well. Satmar don't want anything to do with you. Bells don't want anything to do with you. Right? The great Hasidic houses and the great Litvish yeshiva world doesn't want it because your culture is Auschwitz. There is a direct connection. In the second century, the rabbis of the Talmud had to deal with the same question. Is there anything worthwhile in Western civilization? Right? I mean, ask the question this way. The Nazis performed horrific medical experiments on Jewish prisoners. Is the knowledge gained from those experiments kosher or treif? Right? That's the question. Well, that's a question. So, Rabbi Yehuda says, look, yes, they're barbarians, and morally they are retrograde. And morally we want nothing to do with them. But you got to admit this, Romans are good engineers. I mean, they may be barbarians, but they're great engineers. They lay out streets are straight, right? They lay out bathhouses, they're wonderful. They put up bridges over, it's wonderful. And by the way, he's right. Today, you could go to Europe today, and all over Europe you see Roman aqueducts. They're still there, right? I dare say that my house isn't going to be standing 2,000 years from now, right? But the Romans knew how to build stuff, right? And by the way, Jews don't. Have you ever tried to drive in Tel Aviv? God help you. A Jewish city? Oh my God! Oh my God, it's put together by a synagogue board of directors. You know, the streets go different ways. The name of the street changes halfway down the block. You know, you can't park. You can park. If you park, we take you. I mean, it's like a Jewish city. I mean, a Jewish city in Tel Aviv. God help us. Bring some Romans. The only cities in Israel that are worth driving in are the ones that the Romans built, not us. Rabbi Yehuda's right. So the question is, look, can I imbibe their engineering without imbibing their moral corruption? Really interesting question. I told you, the city we visited on our last trip, some of you were with me, a place called Beitar Eilit. Orthodox Jews. Dell Computer is building a call center there. So when you call in the middle of the night, you're going to get. But now the question is, if you use that, the rabbis of Beitar Eilit said it's okay. But that's because they follow Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Shimon. So Rabbi Yehuda says you can imbibe their engineering without imbibing their morality. Selective assimilation. Rabbi Yossi doesn't know. He's torn, so he stays quiet. Rabbi Shimon is the zealot. In his eyes and in his ears and in his nostrils is the experience of watching his teacher being torn apart physically. So he says everything that they touch is corrupt. Their streets are only for prostitutes. Their baths are only for self-indulgence. Their bridges are only to exploit people. Don't go near them. So what happens? The kid, Yehuda, who was listening, he went off and blabs this to everybody, and pretty soon the Romans hear about it. So the Romans put out a decree. Judah, who acclaimed, shall be acclaimed. He's elevated to become spokesman for the community. Yossi, who remained silent, shall be exiled to Sepphoris. Okay, not so bad, by the way. Sepphoris is a village on the edge of the Tiberias. It's like being exiled forever to house arrest in Lake Tahoe. You could do worse. Shimon, who vilified us, shall be put to death. So they put a contract out against Rabbi Shimon, right? So what does Rabbi Shimon do? Rabbi Shimon and his son's name is Eliezer, hid out in the Beis Midrash. You're a rabbi. You teach Torah for a living. Where you go hide? In the synagogue. No one will ever look for him there. But you understand what they're telling you. They're telling you something really interesting about Rabbi Shimon's mentality, right? Why does he hide out in the Beis Midrash? Why does he hide out in the synagogue? It's not to save himself from the Romans. That's the first place. Somebody once said to me, well, because they walk in, they all look alike. You know, guys, black coats, black beards, they're not going to know who he is, right? Yeah, sure. Why does he go to the Beis Midrash? Because he's not worried about Romans. What is he really worried about? He's not worried about the death of his body. He's worried about the death of his soul. And the only place in the world where his soul is pure and safe is in the synagogue, in the Beis Medrash, right? The place of Torah. Wait 1 second. So what happens is, but there's a problem. You are still a body in space. And as a body in space, you still have to eat and drink. And as a body in space, you still have to imbibe Roman something or other. You can't completely divorce yourself, right? That man standing on the street corner in Jerusalem had just bought groceries using Israeli currency. You can't completely divorce yourself from the world that you vilify, right? So what happens, right? But that his wife would bring him bread and a jug of water. So the woman is his connection to the physical world, which is a very common theme in traditional, pre-feminist mythologies. Woman is the man's connection to the physical world. But he's worried because he says, when the pressure became intense, Rabbi Shimon said to his son, women are vulnerable. They could torture her to reveal the place we're hiding. He wants to protect her. So what do? They went and hid in a cave. And a miracle occurred. A carob tree and a well were created for them. So if a miracle occurred, what do you assume? God endorses their choice. Now, cave for a minute. Everybody stop and think. Tell me about a cave. In mythology, in literature, in Western thought, what does a cave represent? Where do you find a cave? What is a cave? A cave can be a womb. We all come from a dark, wet place. A cave can be womb, and going into the cave is a rebirthing experience. Yes. What else can a cave be? Dark. A tomb. You bury a person in a tomb, in a cave. It can be a womb or it can be a tomb. The question is this a rebirthing experience or a death experience? Anybody remember a cave in Western civilization? Remember, this is a whole discussion of our relationship to Western civilization. Anybody think of a famous cave in Western civilization? What? Rollaway. Well, in the Jesus myths, you're going to see that when we get to the end of today. Oh, no. That's late. Plato's Republic. Plato, P-L-A-T-O, Plato's Republic. The myth of the cave. The parable of the cave. In Plato's Republic, the cave is illusion. It's the world of illusion, and philosophy gives you the ability to climb out of the cave and see things as they really are. Here, because he's rebelling against Western civilization, going into the cave is truth. The world is the world of illusion. The cave is the place of truth. This is a repudiation of Plato. So what happens? Listen carefully. This is great. They would remove their garments and sit up to their necks and stand and study the entire day. When it was time for prayer, they'd put on their garments, wrap themselves in their prayer shawls, and prayed, and then they would remove their garments again so they wouldn't wear out, and thus they lived 12 years in a cave. No, stop for a second. Think about this. So if you walked into the cave, what would you see? No, you wouldn't see two naked men. What would you only see, Mel? What would you see? Their heads. Rabbi Shimon believes that the Romans control the world and I want nothing to do with them. I can't live in their world anymore. But if you can't live physically in the world, then what are you? You're a talking head. That's exactly what it is. You're just your head. I don't have a body. My body isn't in their world. I don't want my body in their world. Right? So what you have here, it's a metaphor for something called monasticism. What is monasticism? It's a philosophy that says that the world is corrupt. And therefore, in order to exalt the spirit, you have to leave the world. Leave the world. Closet yourself away from the world. That's the only way the spirit remains true and pure. But you're a body in the world. So what does monasticism do? It denies the body. You don't eat. You don't take pleasure from the world. You don't indulge in intimacy in the world. Because all of that's corrupt. All of that is sinful. All of that is ugly. All of that is broken. And the spirit can only be exalted if you are nothing but pure spirit, no body. This discussion is an argument the rabbis had in the very first centuries of Judaism. We have experienced Holocaust, Must we leave the world in order to be Jews? Jewish monasticism. And this story is the question of Jewish monasticism. Must we leave the world? Must we live segregated, isolated? Must we deny the body? Because the body is by nature part of the world. Must we turn ourselves into talking heads with no bodies and no connection to the physical world? So what happens after 12 years? Then the prophet Elijah came and standing at the entrance of the cave announced, someone informed the son of Yochai that Caesar is dead and the decree is annulled. Caesar died and they lifted the contract on his life. So they went out. That's interesting. You're living in a cave for 12 years. You walk out into the sunlight. What's going to happen? It's going to be really hard to look, right? And so the Midrash the story uses that idea. They went out. And what do they see? They spent 12 years doing nothing but studying Torah, right? They had a carob tree and a well. So every day they had carob and well, and that's all they ate. They ate very little. They had no physical existence for 12 years. Complete academic freedom, academic liberty, right? So they walk in the world, and what do they see? Seeing people plowing and sowing. What do they see people doing? Working. What are they doing? Plowing and sowing means you're doing what? You're creating food. You're growing life. You're living in the world. You're engaging with the world physically. Rabbi Shimon exclaimed, listen to his exclamation, these people, these men, forsake life eternal and engage in life temporal. That's the clinical definition of monasticism. I divide the world into matters eternal and matters temporal. Matters temporal, that is temporal, means time-bound, physical, immediate, are a waste of time. That's sin. That's a waste of time. That's sinful. I want to live my life in a pure connection with eternity. I want nothing to do with the daily life of people. It's sinful. He divides the two. I'll be right with you. I just want to finish this part of the story. He divides the two. And he says, I want nothing to do with that. But it's more than that. There's a wonderful word in English. The word is judgmental. You make judgment, that's fine. But when you become a person who is judgmental, or you practice something called judgmentalism, what are you doing? Well, here's the definition of judgmental. Whatever they cast their eyes on was immediately incinerated. That's not the X-Men he's talking about. It's this notion that they're so judgmental, these guys. Having spent 12 years engaged in nothing but mystical journeys, anything they see that's physical, that's real, that's normal, whizz. So God comes and he says, what? Listen to God's answer to their judgmentalism. Have you come to destroy my world? Return to your cave. You hear that? What's my world, says God? The world of people growing food and making families and building institutions and caring for each other and pursuing justice. And what's your cave? Your spiritual self-indulgence. That's not my world. Your cave is not my world. My world is this world where people live. Your cave is your own self-indulgent. Right? If it wasn't shul, I'd say it's a masturbatory experience. You're engaged in your own self-pleasuring because you elevate yourself to this extent. You're that much better than people plowing and sowing and creating food. Go back to the cave. Go back to the cave. I'm finishing in a second. So what happens? So they go back to the cave another year. Right? And then finally they say, you know what? You can't be in hell more than 12 months. So let's leave. That's, by the way, why you say Kaddish only 11 months. You know that? Why do you say Kaddish 11 months? Because part of the myth was that your Kaddish is protecting your loved one on their journey through the world, through the next world. And if you were to stand up and say Kaddish for 12 months, you'd be saying, my loved one was one heck of a mamzer, right? So you only say 11 months. You shouldn't cast aspersions on your loved ones. That's the real reason. Finally, they say, all right, so the divine voice comes and says, and this is the only commandment in the whole story. God says, come out of the cave. So they came out and they see a bird And the bird gets trapped, and he understands this is God's will. And so they left the cave for good. And now the Midrash gives you two answers. It gives you two endings. I tell you, rabbinic stories always have more than one answer. They couldn't figure out how to end the damn story, right? So here's answer number one. Whenever Rabbi Eliezer injured somebody, Rabbi Shimon would heal them, saying, my son, it is enough for the world if only you and I occupy ourselves with Torah. All right, so the kid remained a zealot, but the father was reconciled. And he said, look, as long as the two of us are in the world, our goodness will outweigh all the sin of the rest of the world. That's how he thinks about himself. But the Talmud isn't satisfied with that. So we get a second answer, which is much nicer. Here's the answer. It was the eve of Shabbos. They came out of the cave on a Friday afternoon. And they see an old fellow running in the twilight with two bunches of myrtle, two fragrant bushes. And they asked him, what are they for? And the guy says, Lichvod Shabbos. It's to honor Shabbos. Right? Turn the page over. But they say, why do you need two? One bundle should be enough. And he says, you know, in the Bible, in the Torah, the commandment to make Shabbos occurs twice. In the book of Exodus, it says, remember the Shabbos. And in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, observe the Shabbos. So I have two bundles to observe each of the commandments. And when Rabbi Shimon hears this, he says to his son, see how precious the commandments are to Israel, and their minds were put at ease. Now, before we finish, what happened? What happened to all that rage and anger at the world? Why is this man's commitment to do mitzvot so carefully, and why is it the mitzvah Shabbos that reconciles Rabbi Shimon to the world? I mean, in the end, he wasn't so reconciled. I'll tell you the end. That's another ending to the story. But let's use this one. Why is a mitzvah a reconciliation of Rabbi Shimon's problem? Because a mitzvah is a spiritual act that you do with your body. Because it is a spiritual act done in the world. You have a sick friend. Tonight, it's afternoon, you're going to go visit your sick friend. You do the spiritual act in the world. You feed the hungry in the world. You pursue justice in the world. It is the application of spiritual wisdom to the world. That's what a mitzvah always is. It's something done in the world. You can't do a mitzvah in your head. I've thought about it, by the way. Right? I get up early in the morning. I'm lying in bed. My eyes are still closed. I say, I'm not going to get up and go to shul. I'm going to lay here and imagine shul. That doesn't count. You got to get your tochas out of bed, get dressed, come to shul, right? I'm going to imagine all the mitzvahs I'm supposed to be doing in my head. No, you can't do mitzvahs in a cave. That's the point. You can only do a mitzvah in the world. So when Rabbi Shimon realizes that people understand that, he says the world isn't totally corrupt. The world isn't totally corrupt. Number two, Shabbos. What is Shabbos? Shabbos is not one but two commandments. What are the two commandments of Shabbat? Sheshet yamim taseh kol malachtecha v'yom hashvi Shabbat l'Adonai Elohecha. 6 days you will work. And then the seventh day you will not work. Now we always understand that Shabbos is the seventh day, but that's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is 6 days. What do you do 6 days of the week? You work. You have to work 6 days of the week. Right? Seventh day, you take the day off. So what does Rabbi Shimon learn from Shabbos? The cave is not completely treif, as long as it only occupies 1/7 of your existence. 6 days, you have an obligation to build God's world. On the seventh day, you can join God in the cave and live a spiritual life. And the ratio between cave and not cave is 1:6. Is 1:6. That's the ratio. That's the healthy ratio that God set in the world. Well, that's a great question. The Torah always says it's the seventh day, but is that your seventh day or its seventh day? Right? I've actually told people, I got in trouble for this. I said, if you can't make Shabbos on Saturday, do it on Tuesday. Said, no, you can't. All right, fine. Then do Shabbos on Shabbos. So who is Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai? In the legend of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, he is this man who is struggling with how do I live in the world and pursue my spirituality. is there such thing as spirituality which is ever separated from materiality? And this is the repudiation of the monastic tradition. This is a repudiation of Jewish isolation, a repudiation of Jewish monasticism, because God says in this story, leave your cave. I don't want you living in the cave. I want you living in the world. There's work to be done in the world. Take Shabbos. Come back to the cave on Saturdays, but not on Tuesday. There's work to be done in the world. This is a beautiful story, a remarkable story. And you can see where Rabbi Shimon fits in the story, both in terms of his zealotry and in terms of his reconciliation at the end. He reconciles himself. Okay, I can live in the world, but I'm never going to be of the world. It's always a sort of distant relationship, which is a very interesting definition of Jewish life. To live in the world but not be of the world. To always be slightly outside of it so that we can see it and see its moral corruption, its moral degradation, and not let it corrupt us. That's how Rabbi Shimon comes to reconciliation. You've been very patient, and I apologize. Please. I don't have the microphone, do I? No, he didn't give them. I'll repeat the questions. Go ahead.
Rabbi Shimon verified philosophy and the ultra-Orthodox that separate themselves from the rest of the world
Yeah.
have a dilemma. How do they go against the Bible that God said, and you shall be all lagoyim?
Yeah.
You have to be among the rest of the people.
Yeah, so the question is, if the prophet Isaiah tells us that we have to be Or Lagoyim, a light until the nations, we're supposed to be in the world to teach the nations of the world the truth of God, how do you isolate yourself? How do you justify that isolation? What you're asking exactly the right question, because what you're feeling in that question is the struggle between these two ways of thinking. Or Lagoyim, and the Rabbi Shimon at the end of the story says, I have to live in the world because God needs me to do work in the world. But the Rabbi Shimon of the cave says, but the world is going to corrupt you. The world is going to get into your soul. You're going to become like them. And you can't allow that to happen. You can't allow that to happen. And so that's the struggle here. To what extent are we in the world? To what extent are we of the world? To what extent the world poisons us? To what extent must we separate ourselves from the world? That's a very, very powerful Jewish question. It's a very powerful Jewish question, and you have it exactly right. And the other piece of it, which I pointed out to you, is the question is also, and this is a whole other way to think about this narrative, he is the victim of trauma. I mean, suffering the oppression of the Romans and watching the teacher that raised him destroyed in front of his eyes, this is classic PTSD, right? And we are still the victims of trauma. And I don't mean this in any way to be disparaging about the passion and zealotry of our ultra-Orthodox brothers and sisters, and I mean that honestly. But how much of their lifestyle is a response to the greatest trauma in human history? Because before the war, that's not how Jews lived. Jews in Warsaw, there were Hasidic enclaves in Warsaw and Belz and Lvov and all the other communities, but they were never this isolated. There was never this need to isolate. There was always interaction with the outside world, both Jewish and non-Jewish. This philosophy of isolation really is a product of the trauma of the Holocaust. And how do you give therapy to millions of people? How do you help them out of that trauma, the trap of that trauma? Because that rage is only going to destroy them. Why does God want him out of the cave? Because you're going to die in that cave. It'll become your tomb. That's what he does. And you have something to teach the world. That's why he needs him out of the cave. Yes, El.
Something briefly, I learned from Skirball.
Yeah.
There's approximately the same number of people living in gated communities as are incarcerated throughout the world.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
People, the same number of people live in gated communities as there are people incarcerated throughout the world. Wow. That's a scary thought. Yeah.
People need structure.
Well, they're afraid. I mean, there's, but the question is, to what extent does your fear put you behind bars? Yeah.
But it seems that monasticism, the way he was doing it, I inferred that it goes totally against the Torah because
Well, no, if you go children, the biblical terms are pru or vu. The rabbis added Hasidic claim they have all the bodily. They don't want baseball. Well, you see where the rabbis come out at the end. What you're doing is reading back what you know about Judaism from the. I know. The end of the story says that's not the Judaism we're going to practice. Because he believes even breathing the air of the Roman world means you're breathing their moral poison.
Which means no more Jews.
No, he's bodily. Yeah, you're right. In his case.
So if God wants us out of the cave,
Yeah.
doesn't that fly in the face of God giving us free will
Why is that?
to make our own choices?
No, you have free will, and you have to make choices, but God is going to give you instructions. There's 613 mitzvot. You have free will to observe or not observe any of them. God's not going to force you to keep kosher. Trust me on this. But God wants you to do a certain thing, so or at least that's the way the Torah imagines it, so you have a commandment. But the commandment's always a choice. Look, the whole book of Deuteronomy, it over and over again keeps saying, look, you have a choice. Please choose this. This is the way of life, the way of blessing. But you still have a choice. It doesn't deny your free will. It's only the prophet Jeremiah, who's also the product of trauma, by the way, who imagines that at one point in history, God will take free will out of human beings and make us automatic good people. Self-driving souls, you know? People who only do the good all the time. Well, Stepford Jews, right? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. I don't. So here, I want to finish the story because I got to get in the shul. So, that's Shimon Bar Yochai of the Mishnah, of the early rabbinic tradition. Early rabbinic tradition, right? Advanced now 1,000 years. He becomes a legendary figure in the world of Jewish mysticism. And in the world of Jewish mysticism, they imagine that while Shimon Bar Yochai is in the cave for 12 years, God is feeding him all of the mysteries of the universe. So in the 13th century, when the Zohar is created, 14th century, when the Zohar is created, the Zohar is the great master book of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. Zohar is is loosely a commentary on the Torah, but the Zohar is a book. It's written in Spain in the 14th century. Rabbi Shimon becomes its principal character. It's all about Rabbi Shimon and his group of followers who are traipsing across the Galilee, and they have these discourses, and it's Rabbi Shimon who knows all the secrets of God, giving his students all of those secrets. All of those secrets. He becomes the central figure of Jewish mysticism. So he transforms from a historical character, a legendary character, into this remarkable mystical character. So on the back page, I give you just a few of his the most important teachings about him. Rabbi Akiba was one of the circle around Rabbi Shimon in the Zohar. Rabbi Akiba is the scribe. He's the guy that writes everything down. He cited the verse, the Lord said to Abraham, lift up your eyes and see. After the episode with Lot, God says to Abraham, lift up your eyes and see all the land that I'm giving you. So the Zohar asks the question, how far can a guy see? When Abraham looked toward the four corners of the globe, he saw everything. Abraham was given magical eyes to see the entire universe. In the same way, whoever looks upon Rabbi Shimon sees the entire world, the delight of the upper and the lower world. Rabbi Shimon carries a light with him that's so powerful that if you were to look into his face, you could see all of reality. That's who Rabbi Shimon is. He's this character. Now you're going to start to say, I've heard of a guy like this. A Jewish preacher, about 30 years old, traipsing across the Galilee with a group of disciples. I know this story. Where do I know this story from? And you're exactly right. The Zohar is written in Spain, 13th, 14th century. during the Reconquista. The Christians are taking Spain, and it's written under the Christian hegemony. And we borrow the Christian story and reform it. Watch what happens. On the day of Rabbi Shimon's death, I advanced you all the way to the day of his death. This is what happens. He declares, now is a propitious hour. Now is an important day. I am seeking to enter the world to come without shame. There are sacred matters that I have not revealed to you up till now. I wish to reveal in the presence of Shekhinah. That means God. Up till now they've been concealed in my hearts. The Holy One has come here with the righteous of Eden. Blessed is my portion this day. So Rabbi Shimon gathers his disciples around him on the day of his death and says to them, this is the happiest day of our lives, because I'm going to tell you all the secrets I haven't yet told you. And as he's dying, he's reciting to them all these secrets. And finally, Rabbi Akiba writes in his diary, the holy light of Rabbi Shimon had not finished his teaching when his words were hushed. And I did not raise my head, for the light was so strong I couldn't look at it. All that day the firelight did not leave the house, and no one could get near it. What does that sound like? That's the light of the tabernacle. Remember last week we looked at this? The tabernacle is filled with this cloud, this pillar of fire. The pillar of God's fire fills Rabbi Shimon's house. And the disciples can't get close to his body all day long because there's this pillar of light there, right? And I threw myself upon the ground and groaned, and when finally the fire had gone, I saw the holy light, the Holy of Holies, had departed from the world. When his disciples buried him, they heard a voice saying, come and assemble for the feast of Rabbi Shimon. He enters in peace and rests on his bed. They heard a voice in the cave, this is the man who made the earth tremble, that shook kingdoms. Blessed is his portion above and below. How many secret chambers are preserved for him? And Rabbi Akiba's writing this, from the day Rabbi Shimon left the cave in our story, the cave story, matters were not hidden from the disciples, and celestial mysteries radiated and were revealed among them, just as the moments at Mount Sinai. But when he died, the fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped up, and his disciples experienced things they didn't understand. So what happens on the day of Rabbi Shimon's yahrzeit is Lag BaOmer. And Lag BaOmer is a feast and a festival because he decreed it, and heaven decreed that this day we will celebrate the life and the secrets of Rabbi Shimon. This is who Rabbi Shimon is in the Zohar. And once the Zohar starts, then everybody following the Zohar starts enhancing the legend of Rabbi Shimon. So when we get to the 19th century, to the Hasidic tradition, here's how Rabbi Yaakov Leiner of Ishbitz, a Polish rabbi of the 19th century, he says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a unique figure who attained knowledge of all the mysteries of Torah. He's on the level of Elijah, who visited him during the years of the cave. He revealed to him the secret knowledge. This is recorded in the Zohar. He merited the level of Moshe. The guy's excited, right? First he knows all the secrets. He knows what Elijah knows. No, he knows what Moshe knows, right? Because it's written, I will speak to him mouth to mouth. I appear to him clear prophecy. Anyone who ascends to this level does so only through the secrets of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He is the guide for all mystics follow him. As it's written in the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon governs the realms of wisdom over mankind. Anyone who goes up to goes with his knowledge. Then Anan Archa Deraisa, we follow the way of Torah. This is exactly how Rabbi Shimon said it. Rabbi Shimon revealed the mysteries. God enlightened him. All the names from the days of Rabbi Shimon, the Holy One, revealed the knowledge that's in Torah. And from the moment Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai passed, the well springs are closed. As it says, in the days that he lived, God desired to reveal knowledge through him. Woe to the generation he departs. The wise will be few. The mysteries are hidden. He's the last of the greats. So if you want to know all of God's secrets, only Rabbi Shimon knows them. He becomes this legendary figure, the vessel of all of divine knowledge and wisdom. So Thursday, it's Thursday. If you were in Israel, the place to go is Tzfat, because Tzfat is the great center of Jewish mysticism. And just outside of Tzfat is a little farming village called Meron. And Meron is where he's buried. And thousands and thousands and thousands of people are going to Meron. It is the Burning Man Festival. It is Coachella. It is Woodstock. You cannot believe this scene. Thousands and thousands of, they happen to all be from. Thousands of, so no one takes their clothes off. They don't even take their coats off. And they dance and they sing and they light candles, and he becomes the venerated saint of Lag BaOmer, because the day of his death, he carried with him all the secrets, but he left us this legacy of secrets. So there is a beautiful piyut, a poem that is sung. It has 10 verses corresponding to the 10 sfirot, the 10 centers of divine energy in the world. I don't know the melody. And each verse starts with the word Bar Yochai, right? Bar Yochai, fortunate are you, anointed with joyous oil, over and above your companions. It shouldn't be wisdom, because the oil represents priesthood. He's anointed. Bar Yochai, you were anointed with the holy oil that flows down from the transcendent. Like the high priest, you wore a holy crown that set you aside from other men. An aura of splendor bound eternally upon your head. This is beginning not to sound so Jewish, right? This sounds a little bit, we have that too. I just want you to know. But because so he becomes the center of this veneration. Bar Yochai, for 13 years you stood in sand and rocky cave. There you merited the crown of splendor and radiance. Secrets of Torah whose fragrance are sweeter than blossoms and flower. Behold, these secrets revealed to you by your teachers, Moses and Elijah. Bar Yochai, you ascended to the field of apples, that's the Garden of Eden, to gather remedies for the soul of your people. Secrets of Torah whose fragrances are sweeter than blossoms and flowers. For you alone the entire creation of man was worthwhile. No, but remember the last line. What's the last line? What's the second to the last end of the story? Right? He says to his son, you and I are sufficient. So what does the piyut say? You're the reason God created the world. Because why? Because you are the fulfillment of Torah. You are the epitome of Torah. Right? Again, sounds a little bit not like us, a little Christological, right? You perceive the inner radiance of the letter Yud, the ineffable wisdom of Torah that preceded creation. So, Lag BaOmer is the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the death of Shimon Bar Yochai. Shimon Bar Yochai starts out as a great Talmudic rabbi. Then he proceeds to become a great legend. And then in the Zohar tradition, the mystical tradition, he's venerated as this prophet who is just a step below God himself, as the vessel of all the great secrets of the universe. If you meditate on Bar Yochai, you too can have the secrets. But if this week on Lag BaOmer, on Thursday, when Lag BaOmer comes, the secrets don't come to you, come next week, we'll do Torah study again. Shabbat Shalom.
The Christianity of the 14th, 15th century